Have you ever had one of those moments where life completely stops? Where everything you thought you knew about the world just shifts? Well, let me tell you about David Carter's Tuesday Morning, because it's the kind of story that reminds us how one unexpected moment can change everything. Picture this: David Carter, successful businessman, sitting in the back of his town car, reviewing property reports on his way to another important meeting in downtown Denver. This man had built something incredible, a real estate empire that stretched across 5 states. His face had been in magazines. He was living the American dream, the kind of success story that makes people say, if he can do it, anyone can. But here's the thing about life: it doesn't care about your plans. One flat tire. That's all it took. One flat tire on a Colorado highway, and suddenly David's perfectly scheduled day became something entirely different. Instead of that important meeting, he found himself staring at a weathered roadside diner called Betty's Kitchen, just outside Grand Junction. The kind of place you drive past without thinking twice. Now, imagine being David in that moment. You're wearing a tailored suit that probably costs more than most people make in a month. Your watch is worth more than some people's cars. And you're walking into this diner that looks like it hasn't changed since the 1980s. The bell above the door gives this tired little jingle. You know the sound I'm talking about. Every small-town diner has one. Inside, it's like stepping into a time capsule. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape. Faded photographs of local softball teams on the walls. The kind where everyone's smiling with that genuine, unguarded happiness you only see in small towns. There's even an old jukebox in the corner that probably hasn't played a song in years. David feels completely out of place. Around him are truckers, farmers, people wearing ball caps and work boots. Real people living real lives. And here he is, this successful businessman, suddenly reminded of where he came from. Because success is a way of making you forget, doesn't it? You climb higher and higher, and sometimes you stop looking back at the ground you came from. He slides into a corner booth, orders black coffee, and pulls out his phone. Probably thinking he'll make some calls, handle this delay like the businessman he is. Control the situation. Make the best of it. But then he hears a voice. A simple question. "Morning, can I get you started with some breakfast?" And David looks up. Friends, I want you to really imagine this moment. You know how sometimes you hear a voice and it takes you right back to being 12 years old? How a sound can transport you through time faster than any machine ever could? That's what happened to David Carter in that moment. Standing there with a pen and notepad in her hand was Sarah Mitchell. Not just any Sarah Mitchell, Sarah Mitchell. His best friend from middle school. The girl who used to sit with him on the stoop of her apartment building, helping him with fractions when math felt impossible. The one who taught him to hold his head high when other kids made fun of his thrift store sneakers. This was the girl who had bigger dreams than anyone David had ever met. The one who used to talk about all the places they'd go, all the things they'd do when they finally escaped their struggling neighborhood. But here she was, wearing a faded apron, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, and her eyes carried a weariness that stopped David's heart. This wasn't the Sarah he remembered. This was someone who looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Sarah didn't recognize him at first. She was too busy being a waitress, wiping her hands on a dish towel, trying to smile through what was obviously exhaustion. And David just sat there, watching someone who had once been his anchor, his believer, his friend, and he felt his throat tighten with emotions he hadn't felt in 20 years. 20 years. Think about that. 20 years since they'd made those promises to each other, that they'd leave their neighborhood behind, that they'd make something of themselves, that they'd never look back. David had kept that promise. Boy, had he kept it. His real estate empire, his magazine features, his success, he'd done everything they'd dreamed of. But Sarah, David couldn't help but notice things. The slight tremor in her hands when she wrote down orders. The way her shoulders seemed to carry weight between tables. There was a small scar across her knuckles that hadn't been there before. These weren't the hands of someone living her dreams. These were the hands of someone who'd been fighting battles David knew nothing about. And then it happened. That moment of recognition. Sarah glanced up, and their eyes met, and you could see the exact second when the years melted away. "Wait," she said slowly, tilting her head like she was trying to solve a puzzle. David Carter." Her voice. God, her voice still had that same warmth. Like sunshine breaking through clouds. But there was something else there now, something harder, more careful. The voice of someone who'd learned to be cautious about hope. "Hey, Sarah, David managed to say, standing up slightly. It's been a long time. She let out this small laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. I'll say, what are you doing in a place like this? And right there, friends, was the question that contained everything. What was David Carter, successful businessman, doing in Betty's kitchen? He could have said it was just a flat tire, just bad luck, just wrong exit. But standing there, looking at Sarah, he had to wonder if maybe this wasn't coincidence at all. Maybe this was exactly where he was supposed to be. Before he could figure out how to answer, before he could process what seeing her meant, Sarah had to excuse herself. The cook was calling from the kitchen. You know how it is in these places, always something that needs doing. She scribbled something on her order pad and hurried away, leaving David sitting there with his thoughts and his black coffee. And he watched her work. He watched her balance plates on one arm with the kind of practice skill that only comes from doing something over and over again. He watched her move between tables, greeting customers who clearly knew her name, smiling even when the smiles weren't returned. This was someone who'd become invisible in her own life, just another waitress in a small-town diner. David wasn't used to waiting for people. In his world, people made time for him. Meetings revolved around his schedule. Phone calls got returned immediately. But here he was just another customer in line, and somehow that felt right. Like maybe he needed to remember what it felt like to wait, to be just another person needing something. When Sarah finally made it back to his table, she slid into the booth across from him for just a moment. Okay, she said, and there was that smile again, the real one he remembered from when they were kids. I know it's been forever, but it's definitely you. You even got the same serious face. David found himself smirking. Guess I never grew out of it. But Sarah's eyes were taking in everything, his suit, his watch, the way his shoes looked like they'd never touched dirt. You look different, though, she said. In a good way. So where'd life take you? And there it was. The question David had been dreading. Because how do you tell someone you used to share dreams with that you're now worth billions? How do you explain success to someone who's clearly struggling? How do you build a bridge across 20 years and what looked like completely different worlds? I've been in real estate, David said carefully. Simple. Safe. Keeps me busy. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Real estate? Like selling houses. Something like that. He took a sip of his coffee, buying time, dodging the full truth. He could see the curiosity in her eyes, maybe even a hint of suspicion. Sarah had always been smart. She could probably sense there was more to the story. But she didn't push. Maybe she'd learned not to push too hard for answers that might hurt. So you're just passing through Yuma? She asked, glancing over her shoulder when a bell dinged from the kitchen. Yeah, just a pit stop. That's rare, she said, standing up again. Most people who stop here are regulars, truckers, or lost. David chuckled. Guess I'm in the last category then. Sarah grabbed his menu, but before she walked away, she said something that would stick with him for the rest of his life. Don't go disappearing on me. Just like that. Simple words that carried the weight of 20 years, of dreams shared and lost, of a friendship that time and distance hadn't quite managed to kill. As David watched her weave through the tables again, greeting customers by name, refilling coffee cups, carrying the weight of everyone else's needs, he remembered something. He remembered sitting on that apartment stoop all those years ago, talking about opening a bookstore together. The kind with beanbag chairs and walls covered in art from local kids. They'd planned every detail, from the coffee they'd serve to the reading corner they'd create. Seeing her here, carrying plates instead of books, made something twist deep in his stomach. But what unsettled him even more was how easily she seemed to hide whatever was really going on behind that practiced smile. Sarah had always been the strong one, the one who held everyone else up. But who had been holding her up all these years? When she came back with his eggs and toast, on the house, she insisted, with that stubborn generosity he remembered, they talked a little more. About the diner, about the town, about anything except the big questions hanging between them. But David was learning things just by watching her. He saw her rub her wrist when she thought no one was looking, like it hurt. He noticed how she'd pause sometimes, staring out the front window for just a moment too long before forcing herself back into motion. He caught the way her smile would slip when she thought no one could see, revealing something raw and tired underneath. This wasn't the Sarah who used to tell him she was going to own a business someday, travel the world, never settle for less than everything. This was someone who had learned to settle, day after day, for far less than she deserved. And as the morning wore on, As David sat in that vinyl booth drinking coffee that had gone cold, one question kept echoing in his mind. What had happened to her dreams? More importantly, what had happened to the person who used to believe that anything was possible? Because sitting there, watching his childhood hero serve coffee for tips, David realized something that would change both their lives forever. Sometimes the people who lift us up, who believe in us when no one else will, are the same people who forget to believe in themselves. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to return the favor. The lunch rush was starting to pick up. More customers were filing in, and Sarah was getting busier. But she kept glancing over at David, and he could see something in her eyes, a mixture of hope and fear, like she wanted to keep talking but was afraid of what they might say. "You free after your shift?" David asked when she came by with more coffee. Sarah's eyes darted to the clock on the wall. "If I can get someone to cover the last hour, maybe. But..." She bit her lip, the way she used to when they were kids and she was thinking hard about something. "What's this about?" "Just catching up," David said, but they both knew that wasn't the whole truth. Because sometimes catching up means more than just sharing what's happened. Sometimes it means figuring out what happens next. And as David looked at his old friend, still kind, still strong, still carrying everyone else's weight, he knew that whatever happened next was going to matter more than any business meeting he'd ever attended. The story was just beginning. And neither of them had any idea how much their lives were about to change. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones we need most. And as the dinner crowd at Betty's kitchen finally began to thin out, David Carter was about to have one of those conversations that changes everything. Sarah had managed to get someone to cover her last hour, and now she sat across from him without her apron, her hair down, looking a little less like the waitress everyone ordered around and a little more like the girl he remembered. But there was still that wariness in her eyes, like she was bracing herself for something. "Okay," she said, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was an anchor. "I've got 30 minutes before my relief shows up. You wanted to talk. So, talk." David leaned forward. "I wanted to see how you've been. Really been." Sarah gave this small, humorless laugh that broke his heart. "You sure you want the honest version?" "That's the only one I'm interested in." And friends, what happened next is something I think about every time someone tells me their life didn't turn out the way they planned. Because Sarah took a deep breath, looked David right in the eyes, and told him a story that reminds us how quickly dreams can crumble and how much strength it takes just to keep going. "All right," she said. "After high school, I got a scholarship to Colorado State University. Full ride. I thought it was my ticket out, you know. Finally, everything we used to talk about was going to happen." David could picture it, 18-year-old Sarah, probably with that same determined look she used to get when she was helping him with homework, ready to take on the world. "But halfway through my sophomore year," Sarah continued, "my mom got sick. Really sick. Cancer. And there wasn't anyone else, Dave. No other family, no money for nurses or care facilities. So I dropped out. Just like that. 2 years of college, a full scholarship, a future, gone. Because sometimes love means sacrificing your dreams for someone else's needs. I took care of her for 3 years," Sarah said, her voice steady but quiet. "Watched the bills pile up, watched our savings disappear. After she passed." She paused, staring into her coffee. "I kept telling myself I'd go back to school. Just needed to get back on my feet first. But here's the thing about getting knocked down when you're already struggling. Getting back up becomes harder than you ever imagined. I married a guy who seemed stable," Sarah continued. "His name was Rick. He had a steady job, seemed responsible. I thought maybe he'd help me get back on track, you know. Maybe together we could build something." David could hear where this was going, and his heart was already sinking. "Turns out Rick had his own version of dreams," Sarah said with that same bitter laugh. "He dreamed of hitting it big at the blackjack tables in Black Hawk. Every paycheck, every bit of savings we managed to scrape together, it all ended up on those tables. Can you imagine? You're trying to rebuild your life, trying to honor your mother's memory, trying to find some stability, and the person you trusted most is gambling it all away, chip by chip. When I finally figured out what was happening, when I confronted him about where all our money was going, he didn't even try to deny it. Just packed his things and left. That was 2 years ago. Haven't heard from him since. 2 years. 2 years of working at Betty's kitchen, serving coffee and carrying plates, trying to make ends meet in a town where opportunities were as rare as snow in summer. I tried other jobs," Sarah said, glancing around the diner like she was seeing it for the first time. But most places in town want college degrees I don't have, or experience I never got the chance to build. This is steady work. It pays the bills. Not much else, but it pays the bills. The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so resigned, that's what got to David the most. This wasn't self-pity. This wasn't someone asking for sympathy. This was someone who had learned to make peace with disappointment. "Renee." David started, but she held up her hand. "Don't," she said. "I'm not telling you this for pity. It's just life, you know. Some people win big. Some people end up here." But David shook his head. "That's not how I see it. You didn't lose, Sarah. You got knocked down. That's different." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and there was something almost angry in her eyes. "Easy for you to say when you're sitting there in a suit that probably costs more than my car." And there it was. The wall. The distance that 20 years and different choices had built between them. David felt it like a physical thing, this space where their friendship used to live. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I don't remember where I came from. Or the people who helped me get here." Something in his voice made Sarah's expression soften, just a little. Like maybe she was remembering too, those afternoons on the apartment stoop, the way they used to dream together, the way she used to tell him he was smart enough to do anything he wanted. "So what are you saying?" she asked. And friends, this is the moment. This is where David Carter had to decide what kind of person success had made him. Because it's one thing to remember where you came from, and it's another thing entirely to do something about it. They walked out of the diner together as the sun was setting over Grand Junction, painting the Colorado sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah's car, and she was right, it was worth less than David's suit, was parked crooked along the curb. She tossed her apron into the back seat and leaned against the door. "So," she said, "you gonna tell me what's really on your mind, or are we just gonna stand here staring at each other?" David took a breath. "Here goes nothing. What if I told you I could help you get out of here?" Sarah's expression didn't change for a long moment. Then she crossed her arms. "Out of Grand Junction." "Out of this," David said, gesturing toward the diner. "The dead-end jobs, the routine that's been holding you down, the feeling like you're stuck." "And what?" Sarah's voice had an edge now. "You just swoop in and fix everything? That's not how life works, Dave." "Sometimes it is," he said quietly, "if someone cares enough to make it happen." She stared at him. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," David replied, and his voice was steady now. "Sure. This is me paying back someone who believed in me before anyone else did. You're the reason I passed 8th grade math, Sarah. You're the reason I didn't quit school when things got hard. You don't even realize how much that mattered. Have you ever seen someone try not to cry?" That was Sarah in that moment, looking away, blinking fast, trying to hold onto the walls she'd built around her heart. "Even if I said yes," she said finally, "what exactly are you offering?" "A job. Not just any job, a future. I own properties in Denver. One of them needs a manager. Office work, good salary, full benefits. I'd cover all the training you'd need." Sarah's head snapped back toward him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. You've got the brains for it. You always did. And I know you'd be good at it." She laughed then, but not the bitter laugh from before. This was the laugh of someone who couldn't decide if the person in front of her was crazy or genuine. "That's a lot to take in." "Think about it," David said. "You don't have to decide right now. But Sarah, I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because I know you're capable of so much more than this place is ever going to give you the chance to show." And friends, what happened next is something I want you to really think about. Because Sarah didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared past David, watching a truck rumble down the highway, and you could see the war happening inside her head. Fear versus hope. The safety of routine versus the terror of change. The voice that says people like us don't get second chances against the whisper that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. "You make it sound so simple," she said finally. "Sometimes it is," David replied. For a long moment, the only sounds were the diner's neon sign buzzing and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Finally, Sarah looked at him again. "I'll think about it," she said. But David could tell by the way she said it, with just a hint of something that hadn't been there before, that something inside her had already shifted. Like for the first time in years, she could actually picture a way forward. The next morning, David was sitting in his motel room, halfway through his coffee, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello. It's me." Sarah's voice came through, shaky but determined. I thought about it all night. David set his mug down. And I'm scared, she admitted, and the honesty in her voice was like a punch to the chest. It's been so long since I've done anything big, since I've taken any real risks. But if the offer's still there, I want to try. A slow smile spread across David's face. It's still there. I'll have my assistant send you all the details. We'll get you started next month. Silence for a beat. Then Sarah said, so softly he almost missed it, thank you for seeing me as more than this job. For remembering who I used to be. You never stopped being her, Sarah, David said. You just forgot for a while. When he hung up, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years. That same spark he'd had as a teenager when they used to sit on that apartment stoop, dreaming about what was possible. Because sometimes helping someone isn't about the money you spend or the strings you pull. Sometimes it's about showing someone a door and reminding them they have the strength to walk through it. 3 months later, David had a meeting in Denver. But this time, instead of rushing from one appointment to another, he made a detour to one of his office buildings. He wanted to see how Sarah was doing. What he found when he walked into that office took his breath away. There was Sarah, sitting behind a desk, wearing professional clothes that fit her like they were made for her. She had a headset on, and she was typing confidently into a computer, handling what sounded like a complex scheduling issue with the kind of competence David had always known she possessed. She looked up when she saw him and grinned, not the tired, practiced grin from the diner, but a real smile, the kind that reaches your eyes and lights up your whole face. Boss man, she teased, pulling off her headset. You're gonna ruin my productivity. David laughed. Just making sure you're still here. Where else would I be? Sarah said, and there was something in her voice, confidence, maybe even contentment, that hadn't been there 3 months ago. The transformation was remarkable. This wasn't just about a job change or a salary increase. Sarah had rediscovered something she'd lost along the way, the belief that she deserved good things. That she was capable of more than just surviving. As David left the building that day, he thought about how simple it had been. One conversation. One chance. One person believing in another person's potential. And everything was different. But here's what I want you to understand, friends. This story isn't really about David's generosity or Sarah's gratitude. It's about something much bigger than that. It's about the people in your life who believed in you before you believed in yourself. The teachers who saw potential when you only saw problems. The friends who supported your dreams when everyone else called them impossible. The family members who never let you give up, even when you wanted to. And it's about the responsibility that comes with success, not just to remember where you came from, but to reach back and help someone else climb up. Sarah's journey from that diner in Grand Junction to that office in Denver wasn't just about David's money or connections. It was about someone recognizing potential that had never really disappeared, just gotten buried under circumstances and lost hope. Because here's the truth, we all have a Sarah in our lives. Someone who lifted us up when we needed it most. Someone who saw something in us that we couldn't see in ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, they've forgotten their own worth along the way. The question isn't whether you have the resources to change someone's life dramatically. The question is whether you have the courage to look someone in the eye and remind them of who they really are. Sometimes helping someone doesn't mean handing them the world. It means showing them the door and reminding them they can walk through it. It means believing in someone's potential even when they've stopped believing in it themselves. David Carter walked into that diner because of a flat tire. But what happened next happened because he chose to see Sarah as more than just a waitress serving his coffee. He saw her as the girl who had helped shape who he became. He saw her as someone worth fighting for. And that, friends, made all the difference. So I'll leave you with this. Who in your life has forgotten their potential? Who deserves to be reminded of their worth? Because you never know, that conversation, that gesture, that moment of believing in someone, it might just change everything. Not just for them, but for you too. Sometimes the best investment you can make isn't in a business or a property or a stock. Sometimes the best investment you can make is in a person who once invested in you. That's the power of second chances. That's the power of remembering where you came from. And that's the power of believing in someone, even when they've forgotten how to believe in themselves.